Let's jump right into this explainer. If you've ever tried picking up Japanese, you know exactly what it feels like to hit that massive brick wall the second you run into kanji, right? For so many beginners, staring down thousands of complex characters is just literally terrifying. But what if I told you there's a cheat code hiding in plain sight? Seriously. If you know even basic Hangul, the Korean alphabet, you basically already possess a master key to unlocking Japanese vocabulary. Today, we're unpacking some fascinating research that takes this super daunting task and turns it into a really simple, predictable equation.
So, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the shared history, then onyomi versus kunyomi, the pronunciation transformation rule, looking at everyday words in action, a really neat mnemonic strategy, and finally, a solo learning routine you can literally start using today.
Okay, Part 1. The shared history of Korea, China, and Japan. You might be wondering, why on earth does a Korean phonetic alphabet have anything to do with Japanese characters? Well, it all boils down to a deeply interconnected linguistic history. Our source material really hits the nail on the head here. It points out that Korea, China, and Japan are in the same region that uses Chinese characters, so we can infer that the pronunciation of words will be similar. It's kind of like, think of ancient Chinese characters as this massive root system of a tree. As the language spread to Korea, where they call them Hanja, and over to Japan, where they're known as Kanji, the pronunciations branched out. But, and this is absolutely crucial, they kept these striking, highly predictable similarities based on those original sounds. Moving on to Part 2, onyomi versus kunyomi, and knowing the boundaries. Look, before we can actually start hacking the language, we need to know the rules of the game, right? In Japanese, kanji generally have two different ways you can read them, and mixing them up, that is a classic beginner trap. So we have onyomi and kunyomi. Onyomi is the sound-based reading. This is the pronunciation that was imported directly from China way back in the day. Kunyomi, on the flip side, is the meaning-based reading. This is the native Japanese word that got applied to the Chinese character after the fact.
Now, what's incredibly cool to think about is the contrast here. Because onyomi came from the exact same Chinese roots as Korean Hanja, it has this striking regularity. We're talking a totally predictable phonetic transformation from Hangul. Kunyomi, though, it developed completely independently in Japan. So, zero predictable relationship to Hangul, no cheat codes there, which means to make our hack work, we are strictly targeting the onyomi.
Let's actually ground this in a really relatable, everyday example. Take the character for person. It's a super basic, 8th grade level character made of just two simple strokes. In Korean Hangul, the sound for this Hanja is in, pronounced in, right? Just keep that in sound in your head for a second.
Which brings us to Part 3, the pronunciation transformation rule. We've set the stage, so let's get into the actual mechanics of how this sound magically shifts across the ocean from Korea to Japan.
Let's walk through how this builds in 3 really simple steps. Step 1, you've got your basic Korean Hangul sound, in. Step 2, you recognize the underlying character, which is that symbol for person. And Step 3, you apply the rule. In Japanese onyomi, that in sound reliably, dependably transforms into jin or nin. Every single time you see this character in a compound word, there's absolutely no guessing required. In becomes jin or nin. Boom.
Let's jump into Section 4, everyday words in action. Because, hey, theory is great, but proof is so much better. Let's look at some concrete evidence showing how you can use vocabulary you already know to just instantly guess Japanese words. Just listen to this pattern, it's almost like magic. If we take the Korean word for individual, gain, and swap that in for jin, we get the Japanese kojin. Criminal is bomin, that becomes hanin. Human is ingan, which flips perfectly to ninjin. And master or owner is juin, becoming shujin. You see the pattern, right? The Korean in at the end of the word is consistently doing the exact same job as the Japanese jin or nin. It's a total game changer.
Okay, let's put this to the test. I want to actively challenge you for a second using the rule we just learned. In Korean, the word for foreigner is 외국인. Notice it ends with our target character for person. Based on literally everything we've just covered, how do you think you deduce the Japanese onyomi pronunciation? Take a second.
You absolutely guessed it! Gaikokujin. The Korean 외국인 perfectly mirrors the Japanese gaikokujin. The N just transforms flawlessly right into jin. You didn't even need to memorize a completely new word. You literally just applied the linguistic code. How cool is that?
And hey,
If you're sitting there thinking, this probably only applies to a handful of cherry-picked words, well, just consider the sheer scale of everyday matches unlocked by this one single rule. We're talking everything from beauty, which is min in Korean and bijin in Japanese, all the way to life, which is inseng in Korean and jinsei in Japanese. By just understanding this one phonetic bridge, you are instantly lowering the barrier to entry for dozens, maybe even hundreds of vocabulary words.
Moving right along to Section 5, mnemonic memorization strategy. Okay, so how do we actually lock this into our brains permanently? We really need to shift away from rote repetition, just staring blankly at flashcards until your eyes cross, and move toward a strategic mnemonic approach.
The strategy here is incredibly simple. Link the sounds. You no longer have to look at a complex Japanese kanji and just feel totally lost. If you know the Korean Hangul sound is in, you just mentally chain it to jin or nin. You're basically building this sturdy bridge in your mind between the vocabulary you already know and the Japanese you're trying to learn. You just trust the equation.
And finally, Section 6, solo learning routine. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a highly actionable routine. If you're tackling Japanese on your own, you absolutely need a framework that actually works and keeps that intimidation factor right at 0.
So here is exactly how you can structure your study sessions moving forward. Step 1. Base your study on familiar, everyday Hangul words you already know. Step 2. Identify the core Chinese character that bridges the languages. Step 3. Apply the onyomi transformation rule, like turning in to jin, to guess the Japanese sound. And finally, Step 4. Remember to separate the kunyomi. The native Japanese reading, like hito for person, is not going to follow this rule, so you just compartmentalize that and memorize it independently. That'll totally prevent any frustrating learning mix-ups.
Once you start recognizing these shared linguistic roots, learning Japanese totally stops being this awful chore of blind memorization and actually starts becoming an exciting puzzle. And the best part? You already have the pieces. So if learning Japanese kanji is really simply about unlocking a linguistic code you already possess, the only question left is, which words are you going to start decoding today? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and happy studying!